Today on the Midweek Move, we're talking about demons and pigs. Hello and welcome to the Midweek Move podcast extension of the Healing Place, the podcast where we examine the scriptures line by line, verse by verse, and ask ourselves, what is happening here? And today, ladies and gentlemen, Pastor Scott and I are continuing our journey through the book of Mark as we jump into now chapter 5. Are you ready for this, Pastor, today?
I am, and thank you for welcoming us wherever you are today, because we're going to be talking about demons and pigs.
So, and if you have wild pigs, you're like, yeah, that makes sense. Oh, my goodness gracious.
Interesting conversation today.
It is going to be an interesting conversation today. Over the next couple of weeks, it's going to be interesting stuff that's going to be taking place that I really want to encourage you guys to lean in. We're going to some of these conversations about the supernatural, about miracles, and this is a time frame in the scriptures where Mark is real intentional about laying out different miraculous things. We're going to talk a little bit more about that next week. But I want to encourage you guys to really listen deeply to what we're having to say today, because I think it may challenge you in how perhaps you see people around you. Not that you're going to see people as demons. I realized where that was going just now.
And by the way, as we're walking through this, again, this is line by line within the context. But Dallas and I are not saying that, we know everything about every commentary. We've been to every Greek and Hebrew class, that we've got all these multiple degrees. We're not saying any of that. What we are saying is that we want to help you learn how to walk through the scriptures line by line and verse by verse within the context of what the scripture is saying. So if you really want to define the midweek move, yes, it's something right in the middle of the week to kind of pump you up and encourage you and equip you and all those things. But really, our desire is that it would give you guys a hunger to go deeper into the scriptures yourself, not to give you all the answers, not to check all the boxes, but to maybe just light a fire so that you, when you read the scriptures, you won't just take one verse out of context, but you'll read it within the context in which it's given.
Exactly.
So
Good
I
stuff.
thought that was important that we say that.
Absolutely. All right, well, let's jump into it, Pastor.
By the way, where we're recording today, it's cold.
It is a bit nippy.
Are we in Alaska? What is happening right now? If you see breath, that's what's happening right now. I've been in Louisiana too long. This Michigan boy has been in Louisiana too long. I feel so weak right now.
Oh, no.
All right. Matthew chapter 5, verse 1. Then they came to the other side of the sea, to the country of the Gadarenes. And when he had come out of the boat, immediately there met him out of the tombs a man with an unclean spirit.
Okay, so this picks up right after the storm of the last chapter. We know from historical evidence and some internal evidence that we're going to see later that this was likely a Gentile-controlled area. This would suggest that this man with an unclean spirit was also a Gentile who Jesus is going to encounter. Now, 2 weeks ago, Pastor, we discussed the urgency of Jesus' statement to leave and come to this very spot. Likely he was purposely coming to help this Gentile man. Why is it interesting that Jesus would choose to go out of his way to help a Gentile?
This could either be a super complicated answer or really simple. So I'll just keep it simple in my own opinion, in my humble opinion. Jesus is setting forth a precedence for the kingdom of God to come when he leaves.
Yeah.
And that is that the gospel would be to the Jew first and then the Gentile. So in my opinion, Jesus is walking out what he is going to set as a precedence for the disciples, that the Gentiles are welcome. I mean, we go all the way to Acts chapter 9.
Right.
Peter's at Simon the tanner's house, and God gives him a vision of something clean and unclean. He's refusing the unclean, and that's who God is actually sending him to, which is the Gentiles.
Right.
And Cornelius ends up being the open door fully to the Gentiles of the fullness of the gospel. And so I believe in my opinion, that he is modeling and walking out that this gospel is not just for the Jew, but for the Gentiles. And what we'll see later in Jesus' life is he takes a lot of flack for his interactions with the unclean. And we're also going to see that happen. I don't know if it's in this one or next week, but we're going to see that happen in real time in his encounter with someone unclean.
Yeah, yeah.
So I believe that if there was a intentional purpose, that it was to model and to get the gospel to the Gentiles for the early church to begin.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, this is a big deal. Again, he's a just culturally, they don't mix with Gentiles as
That's
a
right.
Jewish individual. So this is a big ordeal taking place here. All right, so let's continue on verses 3-5, Pastor.
So finishing up verse 2, him out of the tombs, a man with an unclean spirit, who had his dwelling among the tombs, and no one could bind him, not even with chains, because he had often been bound with shackles and chains, and the chains had been pulled apart by him, and the shackles broken in pieces. Neither could anyone tame him. And always, night and day, he was in the mountains and in the tombs, crying out and cutting himself with stones.
Okay, so here we see the state of this poor gentleman that we have in front of us. The locals had attempted to bind him, but he broke through them. And with the help of Luke and Matthew's accounts of this very moment, we know that after breaking free, he fled into the wilderness and into these cave areas where there seemed to be tombs, which is not uncommon to have tombs in the mountainside there. He was naked and he was covered in cuts that he had self-inflicted. Like, this was a tortured soul. This is a man that was genuinely just being terrorized. And on top of this, according to the accounts, he was actually becoming a nuisance or a terror to the community themselves. So I wanted to stop just so you guys have a frame of reference of who this gentleman is. Sometimes when we read these passages and we go, oh, a demon-possessed person, okay, and we continue on. But this is a human being who is being tormented.
Yep.
And Jesus is looking at this guy, a man that Jesus, by culture, shouldn't even be talking to, should have no dealings with. And Jesus is seeing this man as not just a person who's messed up, but he's having compassion on this guy.
Yeah, and this is an area. Every time I read this, I stop right here because, and we want to tread lightly here, but cutting didn't just start 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Or 30 years ago.
Yeah.
Cutting didn't just start with the advent of grunge, which many would try to kind of, in our current culture, in American culture, they would kind of begin to go back to maybe 1990, 1991, 92, coming out of the 80s. The grunge era musically was happening out of the West Coast, was very dark, very heavy, very much peeling back the layers of just dark thoughts, putting it into song, being very open with it. It wasn't just party songs or this song. It was more of, suicidal thoughts, and a lot of those things now were being put to music. But as we see here, this manifestation of torment goes back centuries and centuries and millennia. That we would look at this man and say that he was a cutter, because it literally says he cut himself. He cut himself. Now, we don't know if that's in these days. We could go to the point that maybe him feeling like if he cut himself, it would be releasing of those demons. There was a whole belief system in that, that if I cut myself, then the demons, this torment inside, would be released. We do know that at times people would cut themselves just to feel pain, feel something, feel anything, which, as I've talked to many people over the years who have maybe dealt with this type of self-injury, that many times would land there, is that becoming so numb that you don't feel anything. And then that becomes a manifestation of that, just to feel something. But one thing that we do know, and you landed there, is that this man, not demons, this man was tormented. And the people did not know what to do with him anymore. So I know that got a little heavy, but I think it's important that we look at things, and then we also look at the lessons that it teaches us right now, and also that the things that we go through and the things that happen in modern day, they're not new.
Right.
There's really nothing new under the sun.
Right.
So, and that should be an encouragement to us, because if it happened before, then we can probably see a pathway out that maybe had happened before.
Right. And it's, again, I'm glad you stopped there. You're bringing out that fact right there, because there's a lot of people who they look at the scriptures like, what do I have to relate to people from 2,000 years ago? They weren't going through what we have. They didn't have the internet today. They didn't have all that stuff, but we still had people who were going through real emotions and suffering in real ways.
Yep.
So, all right.
Verse 6, when he saw Jesus from afar, he ran and worshiped him. And he cried out with a loud voice and said, "What have I to do with you, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I implore you by God that you do not torment me." For he said to him, "Come out of the man, unclean spirit."
Okay. So it appears that as soon as Jesus saw this man, he began to cast out the demonic presence that was taking place here. Scholars point out that the man's bowing was not necessarily a worship, as the New King James put it, but it was more of a laying down of homage. He recognizes Jesus' position in some fashion.
Which is not an absolute truth. It's just scholars may point that out.
So now this conversation, he says, "What come to torment me?" Another passage, another vocabulary is that send me into the abyss, if you will. The abyss seems to be a place that the demonic hates. Some have suggested that this is the place that Peter refers to in 2 Peter chapter 2, verse 4, where he says, "For if God did not spare angels when they sinned, but cast them into hell and commit them to chains and gloomy darkness to be kept until judgment." So there's a lot of things taking place here. So my question for you, Pastor, is we see clearly that the demonic has some power over the man. But here we see the demonic is genuinely fearful of Jesus and what he can do. What does this tell us about who Jesus is, and how can we find comfort in this?
Well, first, I think when reading this, we have to see that there's a duality taking place here, because there's a man and there's demons. And so the first part of it says, when he, not they, when he saw Jesus from afar, he ran and worshiped him. Now, I know some scholars have meant that's, homage, whatever it is, but the man runs and bows before Jesus. And he cried out with a loud voice, "What have I to do with you, Jesus, Son of the Most High God?" This man, ultimately, we have no record he's ever met Jesus. So this would imply that it's not the man speaking to him, but the demons. And again, that's where we see that there's still a man there, but there's demons there too. And so what's the man and what's the demons? Now, over the past 30 years, I've dealt with a lot of really strange occurrences and some really wild things and things that were not unlike this. And in those times, it's hard to discern what is the person and what is the demon. When is the demon speaking and when is the person speaking? That's why it's so important that we always keep the person in view.
Right.
And that's the one thing I love about Jesus, is that Jesus is not so focused on the demons. He's focused on the man.
Right.
He's got authority over the demons. So there's no reason for Jesus to focus on the demons. He's focusing on the man as an individual. If we ever lose sight of the individual, then we're making it about the demonic than we are the man, the person, the individual. That's why whenever, like, if I've ever prayed with somebody who was dealing with this type of demonic influence, I would always continuously say their name, calling them, not the demons by their name, calling them by their name, to make sure that I am looking at the individual and keeping their humanity ever before me.
Right.
But the question being, what does this tell us about who Jesus is? 1 John chapter 3, verse 8 says, "For this purpose the Son of God was manifested, that he might destroy the works of the devil."
Right.
Well, the devil knows that, and the devil knew that, and the demons know that. And so when Jesus comes on the scene, immediately the demonic knows that deliverance is coming.
Right.
No matter what. Why? Because for this purpose the Son of God was manifested, that he might destroy the works of the devil. So in essence, the man may not know he's about to be delivered, but the demons know what's about to happen.
Right.
They know that Jesus is the Son of God. He's not just a prophet. He's not just a rabbi. He's not just a teacher. He's not just master. he is the Son of God. The demons know that.
Right.
The man doesn't necessarily know that, but the demons do. And so when this cry comes out, what have I to do with you, Jesus, Son of the Most High God, that you do not torment me? Again, for this purpose, the Son of God was manifested that he might destroy the works of the devil.
Yeah.
And the comfort that we find in that is that he was manifested that he might destroy the works of the devil.
Yeah.
That no weapon formed against us in Christ shall prosper.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So good stuff. All right. Well, let's continue on here. Verses 9 through 10.
Then he asked him, what is your name? And he answered, saying, my name is Legion, for we are many. Also, he begged him earnestly that he would not send them out of the country. This language of he and they, he and they, he and they, there's just this real duality happening in the wording of this.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so we aren't entirely sure why Jesus asked for the name of what was taking place here. Some have suggested that Jesus was attempting to ask the name of the man himself, not necessarily demonic. Most agree, however, that Jesus was not attempting to gain control of the demonic by knowing his full proper name, which was a common belief. We talked about that before, and that was a belief back in the day.
That's a common belief today. When somebody thinks that they've got to go through all this spiritual gymnastics to find out the name of, well, the root of whatever spirit is Satan.
Right.
That's who we have authority over in the name of Jesus.
Right.
And underneath Satan is all his demonic forces and spirits and angelic beings. We have authority over all of that through the blood of Jesus.
Exactly.
And that's why it's super important. I would lean towards Jesus asking the name of the man, not the demonic, because he is the Son of God. He already knows.
Right.
So to me, I think the suggestion is that Jesus was trying to get the man, not the demon, but the man. He's already going to do what he's going to do with the demons.
Right.
But it was about the man.
Yeah. And I'm in the same place. I mean, first off, we've seen Jesus several times casted the demonic out without going, what's your name? And going through a 9-step program and telling people to let go and hang on at the same time. It's the man himself. Again, Jesus focuses on this man who is being tormented. Again, I want to point this out. Likely a Gentile man he shouldn't even be talking to, but he's still heartbroken for this gentleman in this situation here.
All right, verse 11. Now a large herd of swine was feeding there near the mountain. So hence we have demons and pigs. So all the demons begged him, saying, send us to the swine that we may enter them. And at once Jesus gave them permission. Then the unclean spirits went out, entered the swine. There were about 2,000, and the herd ran violently down the steep place into the sea and drowned in the sea.
Okay. So the demonic asked for permission to go into the pigs. The goal of the demonic is always to destroy and to just eliminate what's taking place. To date, they had not been able to completely destroy the man that they possessed. They had not broken him completely yet. Jesus was going to, clearly Jesus was not going to allow them to continue their attack on this man, but he does allow them to take possession of the large herd of pigs and allow them to be drowned in the sea. So my question for you, Pastor, is some have wondered why Jesus would allow this to take place. Some have suggested that Jesus wanted to demonstrate to the Gentiles the destructive nature of the demonic. Others have suggested that it's because he wanted to provide proof to the community that the demonic had indeed left the man. Speculating, why do you suppose he did this?
Yeah, it would totally be speculation.
Oh, yeah.
But one thing about it is that pigs have no soul. So the demons going into the pigs is not the same as destroying the man.
Right.
And then also, when you think about, I know we kind of go past this really quick. Okay, they went into the pigs. Well, those pigs belong to somebody. And there was 2,000 of them.
Right.
That's a loss of commerce. That's a loss of money. That's a loss, not just to a person, but you're talking about some of those pigs would have been for food. Some of them would have been sold. And so you have a loss that's taken place. One man being delivered results in a loss for a community and quote unquote, our intimation is a farmer. And so again, why did Jesus do that? Why did he allow them to go into the pigs? Again, no soul going into the pigs. Humanity wouldn't have been destroyed. The enemy comes to steal, kill, and destroy, but Jesus said, I've come to have life. I've come to bring you life and life more abundant.
Right.
And so I won't get into the speculation of scholars and all that other thing, but again, it's all setting a precedence for what's to come after when the gospel is brought to the Gentiles. All these things are being built up as a representation to the Gentiles for when the early church begins.
Yeah, definitely. And again, I won't point out, I'm using the vocabulary. I asked them the speculation because we don't know. There's a lot of people who look at this like, well, clearly it doesn't say.
Nope.
We can speculate. And there's a lot to this whole aspect about pigs don't have a soul. And yes, there's commerce, but what's the value of things versus the value of a man? And so there's a lot that we can chew on. I want to encourage you guys to chew on it, think about it, but don't go making doctrines out of it. All right. Because it's just not there.
That's right.
All right, 14 through 17, Pastor, because we're about to see what happens with these people who have lost commerce.
So those who fed the swine fled, and they told it in the city and in the country, and they went out to see what it was that happened. Then they came to Jesus and saw the one who had been demon-possessed and had the legion, sitting and clothed and in his right mind, and they were afraid. And those who saw it told them how it happened to them who had been demon-possessed and about the swine. Then they began to plead with him to depart from their region.
Okay, so we see people rush out to see what's happened. I see the man has been what appears to be restored to his mind, possibly to health. Now he's wearing clothes, which is a great upgrade from where he was at. At the same time, they see that the herd's been destroyed. Instead of rejoicing over the freedom of a fellow citizen, they seem to be more afraid of what else Jesus could do, and they beg him to leave. Now, in the next verse, we'll see that Jesus doesn't protest. He does that. He respectfully leaves rather than make a scene and declare who he is. What can we learn from Jesus in this moment of how he responds to that?
Well, I do think it's interesting that when they saw the man who had been demon-possessed sitting clothed in his right mind, they were afraid. Not the pigs dead, but the man. So here's this guy that they were afraid of, who cut himself, was bound by chains, broke the chains, was violent, was... we know in that culture, in that geography, and all of that, that if that man was wailing in the middle of the night in the tombs, it would have been heard to the people in town. So there was also an unsettling at night of these wails and screams and yells. But yet when they see him clothed and in his right mind, they're afraid. So they were afraid before, now they're afraid now. And so I do think that's really, really interesting that there is this fear that was on them before, and there's this fear that's on them now. And of course, you've got people telling people. So you've got secondhand accounts going on. There's no telling what's been added to this story.
Right.
Like all these things are happening because it does say, and those who saw it told them how it happened to him. And they began to plead with him to depart from their region. And I think it is important, and what we can learn from the fact that Jesus doesn't protest. Number one, he knows what the will of the Father is.
Right.
That's absolute number one. He knows who he is, and he's totally solidified in his identity in the Father. And then third is if people don't want him, he's not going to force them.
Right.
And that's an important lesson for us, is that not everybody's going to receive the message of the cross. Not everybody's going to receive our testimony. Like not even us preaching to people, but just us sharing our testimony. You might have a lot of people who might look at you and hear your testimony and say, no, that can't happen. And for some people, the kick against you will not be about you at all.
Right.
But it will be about their own lives. And if they give their life to Christ, what they will have to give up. Maybe it's 2,000 head of swine. You know, when I gave my life to Christ, there were things that I don't know if they were taken from me or I gave them to
Right.
him. Relationships.
Oh, yeah.
I lost relationships, not because I was all of a sudden a religious zealot, but just because of the fact that I had made a decision that was counter to the decisions that my friends were making.
Mm-hmm.
And now me being around would not be comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
Like it wouldn't be the old Scott just hanging out.
Right.
It would be this new guy,
Mm-hmm.
which I had the same personality. And it wasn't like I was running around angry at everybody who wasn't serving Jesus. It was like, my language had changed, and the way that I saw things had changed, and the way that I heard things had changed. And my life had changed so radically.
Right.
And I do not blame necessarily those that were close to me,
Mm-hmm.
because my transformation was so radical. It really was overnight.
Right.
I was a different guy. That had to be unsettling for those that were closest to me.
Yeah.
Because these people had known me. They were friends. I had lived with these people. Like I had done community with these people. Now it wasn't healthy community, but there was friendship there. Just because it was unhealthy and just because there was addictions and different things does not mean there wasn't genuine friendship in there. Sometimes I think we try to go so far
Right.
to the other edge that we try to deny the very things that God created and put in us even happened.
Mm-hmm.
That would be like me denying that, Tanya wasn't the one for me because we weren't saved. Wrong answer.
Right.
God had chosen her for me. It just so happens that after we got married and right before we were about to break it all up, we came into a relationship with Jesus, and now we could be the very best versions of ourselves for one another. And so I think the one thing that we can learn here is that Jesus says, listen, I'm not going to force you. Like, I'm not going to force you. I can't force you.
Right.
And although it would be great if I stayed here and you all received the good news and the gospel, you're not going to. But Jesus also knew that this same place would be a place where the early church and the disciples would go back to
Right.
and preach the gospel, and Gentiles would come to know Christ.
Yeah.
And so again, we got to keep that in mind, because Jesus knows what's going to happen down the road.
Right.
And so all of his intentionality is not just because he's a good leader, or he read Dale Carnegie's book, or he read John Maxwell's book, or whatever. It's like, he's not just trying to be a good leader. He's the Son of God. And so the things that he's doing is very intentional.
Right.
Because he knows and basically what he's doing, he's plowing ground for his disciples who are going to come after him.
Yeah. Exactly. Good stuff. All right. Well, let's bring this to a close, Pastor. 18 through 20.
And when he got in the boat, he who had been demon-possessed begged him that he might be with him. However, Jesus did not permit him, but said to him, go home to your friends, tell them what great things the Lord has done for you, and how he has had compassion on you. And he departed and began to proclaim in Decapolis all that Jesus had done for him, and all marveled.
All right. So naturally, this man wanted to go with Jesus, but Jesus instead gave him a new mission: stay and proclaim. The region the man operated in was known as the Decapolis, which is an area of 10 Greek cities. Scholars suggest that that he gave this command contrary to the command that he gave previous people, because being a Gentile area, they wouldn't have a preconceived idea of the messianic mission of God, basically. And it wouldn't interrupt the mission that Jesus was on currently. So my question for you, Pastor, is this command to stay and proclaim can be difficult, especially when people know just how bad you were. What advice would you offer to people who find themselves in a similar situation of having their lives radically transformed by Jesus, but now having to face people that know how bad of an individual you used to be or the things you used to do?
Two things: humility and wisdom. Humility and wisdom. I was in several of these situations,
Right.
and one of those being a 10-year class reunion. And I came to this reunion, and I don't know if they were just trying to jab me or be funny or whatever, but they put Reverend on my name tag.
Wow.
So it's Reverend Scott Etheridge. Many of these people had not seen me since I was 18 years old.
Right.
They didn't know anything about me. again, this was back in the day. Like we didn't have Facebook and Instagram.
Right.
Like we weren't all taking selfies and they were like, oh, here's what he's doing. Here's what he's doing. Nobody knew. And this would have been 1997.
Oh, wow.
So in 1997. And when I went, people literally thought it was a joke.
Oh, wow.
They were like, Reverend, oh, that's so hilarious. Like, man, you're still joking 10 years later. Like you're still, and it led to a lot of apologies, a lot of really deep conversations.
Right.
It led to several instances where I would be sitting in a place with one of my friends, and I would say, "Hey, man, I'm so sorry," da 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 da, or a young lady, and "Hey, I'm so sorry. I remember when I did this, and I hope you can forgive me. I'm not the same person." Right. Now, some people would say you don't have to do that, and maybe you don't get an opportunity to do that. But if you have an opportunity to do that, that really is a testament to the transformation that's taken place in your life, that you would remember something that you did. And what I found out was even if it was something small, the person that I was saying it to remembered it.
Yeah.
Because of how it made them feel.
Mm-hmm.
Like, people really don't care how much you know until they know how much you care.
Right.
I think I just quoted John Maxwell, by the way.
So you read his book.
Yeah. But what I am saying is that when you're in those environments where people do know you and they know all the skeletons in the closet,
right,
the best way for you to do it is be humble. Man, just keep your eyes on Jesus, keep living for Jesus, and be wise. Don't go preaching to every single person. Be wise, because the Lord will give you opportunities. There were opportunities that I had that, man, I wanted to just jump in and start preaching the gospel to somebody, and I really felt like the Lord was like, nope, not yet. And for every one of those people, I had an opportunity years later.
Yeah. And
so what I have seen is that years and years and years and years later, after living this out for 30 years, that now people who weren't so inclined to lean in at 10 years have leaned in at 30 years because they've seen a lifestyle that's been lived out, that's been not perfect, but at least consistent in language and behavior, and just consistency. Right. And to the point where now that we have all this social media stuff, we'll have people watch the broadcast that you've produced, that you've edited, that you've been creative and you've done those things. And because you've used your gift, somebody that knew me when I was bad, 40 years ago, 45 years ago, will watch something and will go, wow, man, that's not the same guy. Like the Lord has done something in that guy.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden I'll see a giving thing come up on our deal. And it's somebody that I went to school with in 1985.
That's cool.
And they saw something. And then they're like, oh, I want to be a part of that. I want to help young pregnant teens. Yeah. Scott's a part of that. I want to be a part of that. And that to me is worth every bit of discomfort that you have to go through at the beginning when people do know all the warts and they know all the things. Man, you just keep living for Jesus. You may not think anybody's looking, but they are. Right. You may not think anybody sees you. You may not even think God sees you sometimes, but he does, and they do. And ultimately, there will come a time, and even if there doesn't come a time here on earth, man, there's going to be some really beautiful fruit that you're going to see in eternity that is going to go beyond anything that we could have gotten here on the earth. Right. And so humility and wisdom.
Yeah. Good stuff. I'm going to tag on to the aspect of what you brought out about the longevity, the consistency of walking this out. That speaks volumes for people. It's easy for somebody to quote unquote act nice for a couple of days, maybe even for a couple of years, but to see that longevity played out for this man as he traveled, people, again, we know from other passages, he was a terror to the community.
Yep.
Word got out about him. And when Jesus healed him of this,
some people did not receive him.
No. They looked at him, and not just, that, but they could see the scars still likely. It doesn't say that he healed the scars on this man's body. They still have these things. But the life that he lived out beyond that was continuing to be a testimony of who God was. And I can imagine how much it changed when the disciples finally came to preach the gospel to them, and they go, wait, isn't that what that dude was teaching us a couple years ago?
And I think it's interesting that Jesus doesn't say go back to those people. He says go back home to your friends, intimating that the people that were there that were afraid when they saw him clothed were not from his home. They weren't his friends. They were just in that region.
Right.
And so my assumption is that he had gotten kicked out of his home because of these manifestations.
Yeah.
And then he had ended up in the wilderness, just in the region around people who did not know him.
Yeah.
And then Jesus says, now go all the way back home
Right.
to your friends and tell them. And then the Bible says, and all marveled.
Yeah.
So that wasn't the people who were the naysayers. They may have never received him as a person,
Right.
ever. They may have always said the demoniac, Legion, that guy, never called him by name. But those that were at his home, it says they all marveled.
Yeah.
It's almost like the prodigal had
Coming
come
home.
back home. Yeah, man. It's almost like a prodigal story.
Yeah.
Because Jesus says, go home. And then Mark is clear here. And all marveled.
Yeah.
They weren't afraid. They marveled at what had happened to this man because they knew him.
Right. Absolutely. All right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I want to hear from you. Has this encouraged you? Has it challenged you? What maybe led you down another rabbit hole of thought? Let us know. Reach out to us, mediahub@thpshreveport.com. If you want more information about the Healing Place, period, just visit our website, thpshreveport.com. Until next time, have a great week.